My name is Amelia, and the day my daughter told me I was a burden, the air in my own home turned to ash. I was 68, standing in the kitchen I'd scrubbed for decades, the same kitchen where I'd braided Claire's hair and baked her birthday cakes, when she looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize and said, "Mom, you're just a burden now. It's time you moved out." Her voice was sharp like a knife slicing through the years we'd shared, and I felt my heart crumple, a paper heart tossed into the fire. I wanted to scream to remind her of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, but I just stood there, my hands trembling on the counter, the weight of her words pinning me to the floor. I'd been a widow for 10 years, ever since my husband George passed. He was the steady hand to my restless heart, and when he died, I poured everything into our daughter Claire and her family. I sold my little flower shop to help pay for her wedding, gave her the down payment for this house, the very house she now wanted me out of. I babysat her children, cooked dinners, folded their laundry, all while they built their lives around me, or so I thought. I was the invisible thread holding their world together, and I never asked for thanks. But to hear those words from my own child, my only child, was like being erased. I looked at her, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on her phone, and I wondered when she'd stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as nothing. The house was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. Claire's husband Mark was in the living room, scrolling through his tablet, pretending he hadn't heard. My grandchildren, Emily and Jack, were upstairs, their laughter muffled behind closed doors. I wanted to run to them to ask if they thought I was a burden too, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I walked to my room, really just a converted office at the back of the house, and closed the door. The space was small, with a single bed and a dresser that held my life photos of George Claire's old drawings, a locket he'd given me on our 10th anniversary. I sat on the bed staring at the faded wallpaper and let the tears come. They weren't loud or dramatic, just a slow, steady stream like my heart was leaking out. I don't know how long I sat there, but the house grew darker and no one came to check on me. Not Claire, not Mark, not even Emily or Jack, who used to sneak into my room for bedtime stories. I was alone, and that loneliness was heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I thought of George, how he'd always said I was the strongest person he knew. Amelia, he'd say, "You've got a fire in you no one can put out." But that night, I couldn't feel the fire. All I felt was the cold, creeping realization that my family didn't want me anymore. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my bones, but I got up anyway. I made coffee, set the table for breakfast, and waited. Claire came down, her face tight, avoiding my eyes. Mark muttered something about work and left. The kids grabbed their backpacks and rushed out, barely saying goodbye. I sat at the table alone, the eggs I'd made growing cold. I kept replaying Claire's words, each one a needle in my skin, a burden. Was that really what I'd become? I'd given everything my time, my money, my love, and now I was just extra. A piece of furniture they didn't know how to get rid of. I tried to talk to Claire that afternoon. I found her in the laundry room folding towels with quick, angry movements. "Claire," I said softly, "can we talk about yesterday?" She didn't look up. "Mom," I said what I said. "This house is too small for all of us, and Mark and I need space. You'd be better off somewhere else, like a senior home." A senior home. The words hit like a slap. I was 68, not 90. I still gardened, still walked 2 miles every morning, still remembered every recipe I'd ever cooked. But to her, I was already half gone, a relic taking up space. I didn't argue. I just nodded and walked away, my throat tight. I went to my room and pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't opened in years. There we were, me, George, and Claire, laughing at a picnic when she was 6. Her tiny hand was in mine, her smile so wide it could light up the world. Where had that girl gone? I traced her face with my finger, and for the first time I felt something besides sadness. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there, anger. Not the loud shouting kind, but the quiet burning kind that makes you realize you're still alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Claire had said about the way Mark never looked at me, about how my grandchildren treated me like a ghost. I thought about all the years I'd spent building this family, only to be pushed out like an unwanted guest. And then I thought about the business, George's business, the one I'd helped him start all those years ago. It was a small trucking company, nothing fancy, but it had grown over the decades, and after George died, I'd kept it running quietly behind the scenes. Claire and Mark thought it was Mark's, now that he was the one keeping it afloat. They didn't know I still owned it, every share, every contract. They didn't know it was my signature on their paychecks, my money keeping their lives comfortable. They thought I was broke, just a widow living off their charity. The thought made my chest ache, but it also lit that flicker of anger into a small, steady flame. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on my best dress, the navy one George always loved, and I drove to the office. It was strange walking through those doors after so long. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, smiled and asked if I had an appointment. I almost laughed. An appointment to see my own company. But I just said, "Tell Mr. Larson I'm here. Amelia Whitaker." Mr. Larson was Tom, my old friend and the company's manager, the only one who knew the truth about my role. When he saw me, his face lit up and he hugged me like I was family. "Amelia," he said, "where have you been?" We talked for hours, catching up on the business, the numbers, the plans. Tom didn't ask why I was there. He just handed me a folder with the latest reports and said, "You're still the boss, you know." I nodded my hand steady as I flipped through the pages. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not Claire's mother, not Mark's mother-in-law, not a burden. Just Amelia, the woman who'd built something from nothing with the man she loved. When I got home, Claire was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up. "Where were you?" She asked, her tone flat. I wanted to tell her to throw the truth in her face, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Just out," and went to my room. That night, I started making a plan. Not a loud, dramatic one, but a quiet one, the kind that grows like a seed in the dark. I wasn't going to beg for their love or their respect. I was going to take back my life piece by piece, and when the time came, they'd see who I really was. The days that followed were strange, like I was living two lives. In one, I was the invisible grandmother cooking dinners no one thanked me for tiptoeing around Claire's impatience. In the other, I was Amelia Whitaker, signing papers, meeting with Tom, making decisions about a company that paid for my daughter's lifestyle. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I just kept moving forward one step at a time, feeling that flame inside me grow a little brighter each day. The weeks that followed felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between the life I'd always known and the one I was quietly building in the shadows. At home, I was still the ghost in the corner, my presence barely acknowledged. Claire's impatience grew sharper, her words clipped as if my very existence irritated her. Mark would come home, toss his keys on the counter, and head straight to the living room without so much as a nod. Emily and Jack, my sweet grandchildren, were slipping further away, their faces glued to screens, their conversations with me reduced to one-word answers. I'd catch glimpses of them laughing with Claire or Mark, and it stung not because I wanted their laughter to stop, but because I wasn't part of it anymore. I was on the outside looking in like a stranger in my own family. But there was another world now, one where I wasn't invisible. Every few days I'd slip out of the house telling Claire I was going for a walk or to the library. Instead, I'd drive to the office where Tom welcomed me with a smile and a cup of coffee. The trucking company, our company, George's and mine, felt like a piece of my heart I'd forgotten I still had. I'd sit in the small conference room going over contracts, reviewing routes, listening to Tom's ideas for expansion. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was hours built from late nights and early mornings, from George's dreams and my determination. I'd run my fingers over the company logo, a simple star inside a circle, and remember how we'd chosen it together, laughing over diner coffee. That star was still shining, and so was I, even if no one else could see it. One afternoon as I was leaving the office, I ran into Sarah, a woman who'd worked for us years ago. She was in her 50s now, her hair streaked with gray, but her smile was as warm as ever. "Amelia," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. "I heard you were back. Tom's been singing your praises." I blushed, caught off guard by her kindness. We ended up at a cafe nearby, talking over tea and scones. Sarah had left the company to start her own small delivery service, but she still remembered the early days, how I'd taught her to balance the books, how George and I had treated her like family. "You were always the heart of that place." She said, her eyes soft. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Her words stayed with me like a warm blanket on a cold night. For so long, I'd let Claire's voice drown out everything else, let her tell me I was nothing. But Sarah saw me, really saw me, and it was like a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. I started to wonder if maybe I wasn't the burden Claire thought I was. Maybe I was still Amelia, the woman who'd kept a business afloat through recessions, who'd raised a daughter alone after George died, who'd never stopped loving even when it hurt. Back at home, the distance between me and Claire grew wider. One evening, I overheard her talking to Mark in the living room. "She's slowing down," Claire said, her voice low but clear. "I don't know how much longer we can do this. She needs to go somewhere permanent." Mark grunted in agreement, and I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. Permanent. Like I was a problem to be solved, a piece of clutter to be boxed up and shipped away. I wanted to storm in to tell them I wasn't going anywhere, but instead I retreated to my room, my hands shaking as I closed the door. That night I pulled out the locket George had given me. It was simple silver with a tiny star engraved on the front. Inside was a photo of us on our wedding day, young and fearless, our smiles full of promises. I held it tightly, feeling the weight of all the years we'd shared, the love that had carried me through. "What would you do, George?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I could almost hear his answer, steady and sure. "You'd fight Amelia. You always have." And he was right. I'd fought for Claire when she was born, premature, fought for the business when banks turned us away, fought for myself when grief tried to swallow me whole. I wasn't done fighting yet. The next morning I did something small but bold. I stopped cooking breakfast. For years, I'd risen early, setting out plates, making eggs and toast, hoping for a moment of connection. But no one noticed, and I was tired of trying to earn their love. So I poured myself a coffee, sat in the backyard, and let the house wake up without me. Claire didn't say anything, but I saw her glance at the empty counter, her lips tightening. It was a tiny act, barely a ripple, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I wasn't here to serve them anymore. I was here because this was my home bought with my money, my sacrifices. That afternoon, I went to the garden shed, another place I'd neglected. The tools were dusty, the flower pots cracked, but I could still smell the earth, the promise of growth. I started digging, pulling weeds, turning the soil. It was hard work, my back aching, my hands caked with dirt, but it felt good, like I was waking up muscles I'd forgotten I had. I planted a single rose bush, one I'd bought on a whim at the nursery. It was small, its buds tightly closed, but I knew it would bloom if I cared for it. As I patted the soil around its roots, I thought of myself, of all the years I'd spent tending to others, and how little I'd tended to my own heart. Over the next few days, I kept going small steps, quiet ones. I stopped folding. Claire's laundry, stopped picking up after the kids. I spent more time in the garden, more time at the office. I started calling old friends, women I'd lost touch with after George died. One of them, Margaret, invited me to a book club, and though I hesitated, I went. The women were kind, their laughter filling the room as we talked about novels and life. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Margaret, who was 72 and fierce as ever, pulled me aside after and said, "Amelia, you've got a spark in you. Don't let it go out." I smiled, my throat tight, and promised her I wouldn't, but the pain was still there, sharp and raw. One evening, Emily came into my room, her face hesitant. She was 15, all long limbs and quiet eyes, and for a moment I thought she might hug me, might say she missed me. Instead, she asked if I could lend her $20 for a school trip. I gave it to her, of course, but as she left without a thank you, I felt a fresh wave of grief. Even my grandchildren, the ones I'd rocked to sleep, saw me as a means to an end. I sat on my bed, the locket in my hand, and let myself cry. Not for them, but for the woman I'd been the one who'd believed love was enough. The next day, I went back to the office, my resolve hardening. Tom and I started talking about the future, not just the company's, but mine. He suggested I take a more active role, maybe even move closer to the office. The idea scared me, but it also thrilled me. I'd spent so long living for others, I'd forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. I started looking at apartments, small ones with balconies where I could grow roses. I didn't tell Claire, or Mark didn't tell anyone. This was my secret, my lifeline, and I held it close. At home, the tension was palpable. Claire started leaving brochures for senior homes on the kitchen counter, their glossy pages screaming her intentions. I ignored them, but each one was a reminder of how little she valued me. One night, she cornered me in the hallway, her voice cold. "Mom, we need to talk about your plans. You can't stay here forever." I looked at her. Really looked at her and saw a stranger. "I'm not going anywhere yet," I said, my voice steady. She blinked, surprised, but I didn't wait for her response. I walked to my room, my heart racing, feeling that flame inside me burn brighter. I was done begging for their love. I was done being invisible. I was Amelia, and I was going to take back my life one quiet, deliberate step at a time. The rose bush in the garden was starting to bud, its petals peeking through. I smiled as I watered it, knowing I was budding too slowly, silently, but surely. The rose bush became my sanctuary, a small corner of the world where I could breathe. Each morning I'd slip out to the backyard before the house woke my hands in the soil, coaxing life from the earth. The buds were unfurling now, their petals a soft pink against the green, and every time I saw them, I felt a quiet pride. I was still here, still growing, even if no one else noticed. But the house itself was another story. Claire's brochures for senior homes kept appearing, a silent campaign to push me out. She'd leave them on the counter, the dining table, once even on my bed, as if I could be worn down by glossy promises of active living and community care. I'd sweep them into the trash without a word, but each one left a bruise on my heart. Claire's coldness was relentless. She stopped asking where I went when I left the house, stopped pretending to care. Mark was no better, his silence a wall I couldn't climb. The kids, Emily and Jack, were caught in their own worlds, school friends' phones, and I couldn't tell if they were avoiding me or simply didn't see me anymore. One afternoon, I found Jack in the kitchen rummaging for snacks. I tried to start a conversation asking about his soccer game. He shrugged, mumbled fine, and left the room, his earbuds dangling. I stood there holding an apple I'd meant to offer him, feeling like I was disappearing. But I wasn't disappearing, not really. Outside the house, I was coming back to life. My visits to the office grew more frequent, and with each one I felt stronger, more like the Amelia I'd been before grief and neglect had worn me down. Tom was a steady presence, his faith in me unwavering. One day, he pulled out a dusty box from the storage room filled with old company records. Inside were letters I'd written to clients, budgets I'd balanced, even a photo of me and George at the company's first anniversary party, our arms around each other, laughing. "You built this," Amelia Tom said, his voice firm. "Don't ever forget that." I took the photo home, tucking it into my dresser, a reminder of who I was. I also started spending more time with Sarah, the former employee I'd run into. She'd call me up insisting I join her for coffee or a walk in the park. Sarah had a way of making me laugh, her stories about her own struggles, divorce starting over, raw and real. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench watching ducks glide across a pond, she turned to me, her eyes serious. "Amelia, You're letting them dim your light. Your daughter, her husband, they don't get to decide your worth." I looked away, my throat tight, but her words sank deep. She was right. I'd spent too long letting Claire's cruelty define me. It was time to stop. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through my closet. It was full of practical clothes, cardigans, slacks, things I'd worn to blend in, to be the unobtrusive grandmother. But buried in the back were dresses from another life, ones I'd worn when George and I would go dancing or host dinners for friends. I pulled out a deep green dress, its fabric soft and flowing, and held it against me in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't a burden. She was Amelia, with lines on her face that told stories, with hands that had built and loved and lost. I hung the dress on the door, a promise to wear it soon. The next day I called Margaret from the book club and asked if she knew a real estate agent. I wasn't ready to leave the house yet, but I wanted options, a safety net. Margaret connected me with a woman named Linda, who was warm and no nonsense. Over coffee, I told Linda I was thinking about apartments, maybe something small with a balcony for gardening. She listened, her eyes kind, and promised to find me something perfect. "You deserve a place that feels like home, Amelia," she said, and I nearly cried at the simple truth of it. A home. Not a converted office in my daughter's house, not a senior facility, but a real home, mine. At the office, I started taking on more responsibility. Tom and I worked on a new contract with a regional distributor, a deal that could double our revenue. I was nervous at first, my confidence rusty, but as we negotiated terms and reviewed numbers, I felt the old spark return. I was good at this, always had been. One afternoon, as we finalized the paperwork, Tom grinned and said, "Amelia, you're a force. George would be proud." I smiled, my heart full, and for the first time in years, I believed him. But home was still a battlefield. One evening, Claire confronted me in the kitchen, her arms crossed. "Mom, we need to set a timeline. Mark and I are serious about you moving out." Her tone was final, like she was giving an employee a deadline. I looked at her. My daughter, the girl I'd carried through fevers and heartbreaks, and felt a strange calm. "I heard you, Claire." I said, my voice even, "but I'm not ready to decide." She stared clearly, expecting me to crumble, but I held her gaze until she turned away, muttering something under her breath. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step. I wasn't begging anymore. The garden kept me grounded. The rose bush was blooming now, its flowers vibrant against the dull yard. I added more plants, lavender daisies, a small lilac bush, turning the neglected corner into something alive. One morning, as I was pruning, a young woman from next door, Lily, leaned over the fence. She was in her 20s, with bright eyes and a shy smile. "Your garden's beautiful," she said. "My mom used to grow roses." We talked for a while, and I learned Lily was caring for her sick father, juggling work and worry. I gave her a cutting from the rose bush wrapped in damp paper towel, and she hugged me, her gratitude so genuine it warmed me through. For the first time in months, I felt needed, not as a grandmother or a mother, but as me. Lily started stopping by more often, bringing me tea or asking for gardening tips. She'd sit with me in the backyard, listening as I told stories about George, about the early days of the business. She never rushed me, never made me feel old or irrelevant. One day she brought a small clay pot she'd painted filled with soil and asked if we could plant something together. We chose marigolds, their seeds, tiny promises in our hands. As we worked, I realized how much I'd missed this connection, not obligation. Lily was becoming a friend, a bright spot in my gray days, but the darkness was still there. One night, I overheard Mark on the phone, his voice low but clear. "Yeah, we're working on getting her out. It's just taking longer than we thought." My blood ran cold. They weren't just talking about senior homes anymore. They were planning, scheming, as if I were a problem to be solved. I sat in my room, the locket in my hand, and felt the anger flare again, hotter now. They thought I was helpless, a broke widow they could push around. They didn't know I held the keys to their world, the business, the house, everything. The next morning, I called Tom and asked him to pull the company's financial records, every detail of what we'd paid out to Mark and Claire. I wanted to know exactly how much of their lifestyle, Claire's new car, Mark's golf trips, the kids' private school, came from me. Tom didn't ask questions. He just said, "Give me a week." I also met with Linda, who'd found a few apartments. One caught my eye, a cozy place with a south-facing balcony perfect for roses. I told her to keep it on hold, my heart racing at the possibility of a new start. As I drove home, I passed a park where George and I used to walk. On impulse, I stopped and sat on a bench, watching families laugh and play. I thought of Claire as a child, how she'd cling to my hand, how I'd promised to always protect her. I still loved her even now, but I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for her. I opened the locket, tracing George's face, and made a silent vow I was going to live again, not for Claire or Mark or anyone else, but for me. The rosebush was thriving its blooms, a quiet rebellion against the neglect around me. I watered it, my hands steady, and felt the flame inside me grow. I was Amelia, and I was ready to fight, not with shouts or tears, but with the quiet strength I'd always had. The brochures could pile up, the silences could stretch, but I wasn't going anywhere until I chose to. And when I did, it would be on my terms. The days began to blur, each one a delicate dance between the life I was reclaiming and the one I was still tethered to. The house felt smaller, its walls closing in with every cold glance from Claire, every dismissive grunt from Mark. But I was no longer just the woman in the converted office waiting for scraps of affection. I was Amelia, and I was building something new, brick by quiet brick. The rosebush in the garden was my mirror, its blooms defiant and full a reminder that I could thrive even in hard soil. I tended it daily, my hands steady in the earth, and with each new petal I felt myself unfurling too. My time at the office became my refuge. Tom and I were deep into the new contract, and I threw myself into the work with a hunger I hadn't felt in years. I'd sit at the conference table, papers spread out, my mind sharp as we mapped out logistics and budgets. I was surprised at how easily it came back, the numbers, the strategies, the instinct for what would work. One afternoon as we finalized a deal, Tom leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Amelia, you're running circles around me. We should have dragged you back here years ago." I laughed a real laugh, and for a moment the weight of Claire's words lifted. I wasn't a burden here. I was needed, valued, alive. Outside the office, I was taking other steps, small but deliberate. Linda, the real estate agent, sent me photos of the apartment with the south-facing balcony. It was simple but bright, with big windows and a view of a quiet street lined with oaks. I could see myself there, my roses in pots, a kettle whistling on the stove. I told Linda to put in an application, my heart pounding as I signed the forms. It wasn't a commitment yet, just a possibility, but it felt like a door cracking open. I didn't tell Claire or Mark. This was mine, a secret I held close like the locket around my neck. I also started spending more time with Lily, the young woman from next door. She'd come over with her painted pots, and we'd plant together our hands in the soil, our laughter soft against the hum of the evening. Lily was a gift. Her kindness unforced her stories about her father's illness and her dreams of becoming a teacher, pulling me out of my own pain. One day she brought me a small journal, its cover embossed with flowers. "For your thoughts," she said, her eyes shy. That night I wrote in it for the first time, pouring out the hurt, the anger, the hope. It was like talking to George again, his steady presence in every word I wrote. But the house was a different story. Claire's campaign to push me out grew bolder. One evening, she sat me down at the dining table, a stack of brochures in front of her. "Mom, we found a place for you." She said, her voice clipped, like she was checking off a task. "It's got activities, meals, everything you need." I looked at the brochure, a sterile place with smiling seniors in pastel sweaters, and felt my stomach twist. "I'm not ready, Claire," I said, my voice calm but firm. She sighed, exasperated. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to help you." Help me. The words were a lie, and we both knew it. I stood up, leaving the brochure on the table, and walked to my room. My heart racing. I wasn't going to let her decide my future. The next day, I did something symbolic, something for me. I took the green dress from my closet, the one I'd pulled out weeks ago, and wore it to the office. It felt strange at first, the fabric soft against my skin, the color bold in a way I hadn't been in years. But when Tom saw me, he whistled, his eyes twinkling. "Look at you, Amelia. George would have loved this." I smiled, my cheeks warm, and for the rest of the day, I carried myself differently, taller, surer. The dress wasn't just cloth. It was a declaration. I was still here, still vibrant, still Amelia. I also started making other changes. I met with a lawyer, a quiet woman named Susan, who specialized in estate planning. I wanted to review my will to make sure my assets, the business, the house, my savings were protected. Susan listened as I explained my situation, her eyes kind but sharp. "You've got more power than you realize, Amelia," she said, flipping through the documents. "This company, this house, they're yours. You decide what happens to them." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't helpless. I asked her to draft a new will, one that reflected my wishes, not Claire's assumptions. I didn't tell her the details yet, but I knew I wanted to be fair to my grandchildren, to myself. At home, the tension was a living thing. Mark started dropping hints, his comments veiled but cutting. "This place is getting crowded," he'd say, "or we could use your room for a home office." I ignored him, but each jab fueled my resolve. One night, I overheard Claire and Mark arguing in the living room. "She's not budging." Claire snapped. "What are we supposed to do? Just wait." Mark's voice was low, impatient. "We'll figure it out. She can't stay forever." I stood in the hallway, my hands clenched, and realized they were counting on me to break. They thought I'd give in, pack my bags, and fade away. They were wrong. The garden kept me sane. I added more plants, hydrangeas, peonies, a small trellis for climbing vines. Lily helped, her enthusiasm infectious. One afternoon, as we planted tulip bulbs, she looked at me, her face serious. "You're so strong, Amelia. I don't know how you do it living here with everything." I paused my trowel in the soil and felt a lump in my throat. "I don't always feel strong," I admitted. She reached over, squeezing my hand, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone in my fight. "Tom called me one morning with the financial records I'd asked for. We met at the office, and he spread the papers out, his expression grim. 'You were right to check Amelia,' he said. 'Mark's been taking bonuses he didn't earn, and Claire's been charging personal expenses to the company account.' I stared at the numbers, my chest tight. Every spa day, every vacation, every new gadget they'd been paid for with my money, my work. I felt betrayed, not just as a mother, but as the woman who'd built this company from nothing. "What can we do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the ache. Tom leaned forward. "You're the owner. You can freeze their access, redirect funds, even fire Mark if you want." The power was mine, but I wasn't ready to use it yet. I needed time, a plan. That evening, I went to the park again, the one where George and I used to walk. I sat on our old bench, the locket in my hand, and thought about the life I'd lived. I'd given everything to Claire, my love, my money, my dreams, and she'd thrown it back in my face. But I wasn't done living. I was 68 with years ahead, and I deserved more than a corner room and a stack of brochures. I closed the locket, my resolve hardening. I was going to take back my life, not with anger or revenge, but with the quiet dignity George had always loved in me. The next day, I called Linda and told her to move forward with the apartment. I also asked Susan to finalize the new will, making sure Emily and Jack were provided for, but with conditions that protected my legacy. I started packing small things, photos, books, the journal Lily gave me, not to leave yet, but to be ready. The rose bush was in full bloom now, its scent sweet in the air. I cut a single flower and placed it on my dresser, a reminder of what I was fighting for myself. At home, Claire's pressure didn't let up. She left voicemails from senior homes, their cheerful messages, a mockery of my reality. But I was no longer the woman who'd crumble under her words. I wore the green dress to book club, laughed with Margaret and the others, and felt my spark grow. I worked with Tom signed contracts and dreamed of a balcony filled with roses. I was Amelia, and I was rewriting my story, one deliberate choice at a time. The house could close in, the brochures could pile up, but I was building a new home inside myself and soon somewhere else. The air in the house grew heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Claire's impatience was no longer subtle. It was a storm brewing in every glance, every sigh. She'd stopped leaving brochures and started making direct demands, her voice sharp with frustration. "Mom, you need to decide soon," she said one morning, her arms crossed as I sipped my coffee in the kitchen. "We can't keep waiting." I looked at her, my daughter, her face so like mine, but hardened by something I couldn't name, and felt a strange detachment. "I'm still thinking Claire." I said, my tone even, and walked away before she could respond. It was a small rebellion, but it steadied me like the rose bush standing tall in the garden. I was moving forward now, my steps surer with each passing day. The apartment with the south-facing balcony was mine. I'd signed the lease with Linda, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with excitement. I hadn't told Claire, or Mark hadn't told anyone except Lily, who squealed and hugged me when I shared the news. "Amelia, it's going to be perfect," she said, her eyes bright. We sat in the garden planning how I'd arrange my roses, and for the first time in years, I let myself dream of a future that was mine alone. The apartment was a blank canvas, a place where I could be Amelia, not a mother, not a grandmother, but a woman with a life to live. At the office, I was stepping fully into my role. Tom and I were preparing to announce the new contract, a milestone that would secure the company's future for years. I was nervous, but not about the work. I knew I could do it. My fear was about what came next, about the choices I'd have to make. Tom had the financial records ready, a detailed map of Mark and Claire's overreach. The numbers were staggering, thousands spent on vacations, clothes, even a new boat Mark had bragged about, all charged to the company I owned. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, not just for the money, but for the betrayal. They'd taken my trust, my love, and turned it into a blank check. One afternoon, I met with Susan the lawyer to finalize my will. I'd thought long and hard about what I wanted. Emily and Jack would get their share college funds, a small trust, but only when they were older, independent of Claire and Mark. The business would stay under my control with Tom as my successor if I stepped away. The house, the one Claire thought was hers, would be sold, the proceeds split between charity and my grandchildren's future. I wasn't cutting Claire out entirely, but I was done letting her assume she could claim what I'd built. Susan nodded as I explained, her pen moving across the page. "You're taking back your power, Amelia," she said. "That's no small thing." I smiled, feeling the weight of her words. Power. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. Back home, I started packing in earnest, though quietly. I'd wrap photos in tissue paper, fold clothes into boxes, each item a piece of my life I was choosing to take with me. I didn't want Claire or Mark to know, not yet. I'd leave when I was ready on my terms. One evening, as I packed a box of George's old letters, I found a note he'd written me years ago, tucked inside a book. "Amelia, you're my star," it read. "Never stop shining." I held it to my chest, tears falling, and felt him with me, cheering me on. I slipped the note into the locket next to our wedding photo, a talisman for the road ahead. The garden was my solace, its colors brighter with every bloom. Lily and I planted more marigolds, their golden heads nodding in the breeze. She'd bring her father's old radio, and we'd listen to jazz as we worked the music, weaving through our laughter. One day, she looked at me, her hands muddy, and said, "You're like a second mom to me, Amelia. I hope you know that." I froze my throat tight. A second mom. After all the pain of losing Claire's love, Lily's words were a balm, a reminder that family wasn't just blood, it was the people who saw you, who chose you. I hugged her, my heart full, and knew I'd carry her friendship with me no matter where I went. But the house was a pressure cooker. Mark's comments grew bolder, his entitlement clear. "We're thinking of renovating," he said one night at dinner, his eyes on me. "Might need your room for a guest suite." Claire nodded her silence in agreement. I didn't respond, just kept eating my fork steady. Inside, I was seething, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. They thought they could push me out, that I'd fold under their pressure. They didn't know I was already halfway gone, my new life waiting just beyond their reach. I started spending more time with the book club, their warmth a contrast to the chill at home. Margaret, fierce and funny, became my confidant. Over tea one afternoon, I told her about the apartment, the business Claire's betrayal. She listened, her eyes blazing. "Amelia, you're not just surviving, you're rewriting the damn story," she said. "Don't let them dim you." I laughed, her fire catching in me. That night I wore the green dress to the book club, and when the women complimented me, I didn't shy away. I was done hiding. At the office, the new contract was signed a triumph that felt like mine alone. Tom threw a small celebration, just the staff, with cake and sparkling cider. They toasted me their words full of respect, and I stood there, my heart swelling. I wasn't the invisible widow the burden Claire saw. I was Amelia Whitaker, the woman who'd kept this company alive, who'd negotiated a deal that would outlast us all. I took a sip of cider, the bubbles sharp on my tongue, and felt a quiet victory. This was my legacy, and no one could take it from me. But the pain lingered. One evening, Emily came to my room, her face hesitant. I hoped for a moment of connection, a sign she still cared. Instead, she asked for money again, this time for a new phone. I gave it to her, my heart sinking, and watched her leave without a backward glance. I sat on my bed, the locket in my hand, and let myself grieve not just for Emily, but for the family I'd lost. I loved them still, but I couldn't keep pouring myself into people who didn't see me. I had to choose myself now. The next day, I took a bold step. I told Tom to freeze Mark's company accounts, no bonuses, no personal expenses, just his base salary. I also asked him to prepare a letter, one that would clarify my ownership of the business. I wasn't ready to send it yet, but I wanted it ready, a sword I could draw when the time came. Tom nodded, his expression serious. "You're doing the right thing, Amelia," he said. "They need to know who you are." I thanked him, my resolve firm. I wasn't acting out of spite. I was protecting what was mine, what George and I had built. That evening I went to the park, my ritual now. I sat on the bench, the locket warm in my hand, and thought of George. "I'm almost there," I whispered, imagining his smile. I was scared, but not of leaving. I was scared of how much I wanted this new life, how fiercely I was ready to claim it. The rosebush was thriving its blooms, a testament to my care. I cut another flower, placing it in a vase by my bed, its scent a promise of what was coming. At home, Claire's demands grew louder, her patience gone. "We've set a deadline, Mom," she said one night, her voice cold. "You have a month." I looked at her, my heart steady. "We'll see," I said, and walked away, leaving her stunned. I wasn't the woman she thought she could bully anymore. I was Amelia with a new home, waiting, a business, thriving, a life blooming. The brochures were gone, the silences deeper, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready to step into the light, and when I did, they'd see me not as a burden, but as the woman I'd always been. The month Claire gave me felt like a countdown, each day ticking by with a weight I could feel in my bones. But I wasn't counting down to defeat, I was counting up to freedom. The house was a cage now, its silence louder than any argument. Claire's deadline hung over us, unspoken but ever present in the way she avoided my eyes in Mark's clipped words, in the way Emily and Jack moved through the house like I was a shadow. I didn't fight it, didn't beg for their love. I was done chasing what they wouldn't give. Instead, I poured my energy into the life I was building, the one waiting just beyond their reach. My new apartment was becoming real. Linda helped me pick out furniture, simple pieces, a soft blue sofa, a wooden table for my roses. I'd visit the empty space standing on the balcony where the morning light spilled in, imagining my plants, my books, my life. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a sanctuary, a testament to my choice to keep going. I started moving small things over a box of photos, the journal Lily gave me, the vase with the rose I'd cut. Each trip was a quiet act of defiance, a step toward the woman I was becoming. I didn't tell Claire or Mark. They didn't deserve to know. At the office, I was in full command. The new contract was rolling out and the company was buzzing with energy. I led meetings, my voice steady, my decisions clear. The staff respected me, their nods and smiles, a balm to the wounds Claire had left. Tom was my rock, his faith in me unwavering. One afternoon, he handed me the letter I'd asked for, the one detailing my ownership of the business. It was simple, factual, but its weight was immense. "Whenever you're ready, Amelia," he said, his eyes serious. I tucked it into my bag, my heart racing. Not yet, but soon. I also met with Susan again, finalizing the last details of my will. I added a provision for Lily, a small fund for her education, a thank you for her friendship. I left the house to be sold, the proceeds, split between Emily and Jack's trusts, and a local charity for widows. The business would pass to Tom if I stepped away with a clause, ensuring Claire and Mark had no claim. It wasn't about punishment, it was about protecting what George and I had built. Susan looked at me as we signed the papers, her smile warm. "You're a force, Amelia," she said. "Don't ever forget that." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. The garden was my haven, its colors a rebellion against the gray of the house. The rosebush was a riot of blooms now, its scent carrying on the breeze. Lily and I added a bench, a place to sit and talk our hands, stained with soil. She'd bring stories of her father's better days, and I'd share memories of George, our voices weaving a tapestry of love and loss. One evening as the sun set, Lily looked at me, her eyes soft. "You're going to be okay, Amelia. More than okay." I squeezed her hand, my throat tight. She saw me not as a burden, but as a woman with a story worth hearing. That was enough. At home, the pressure was relentless. Claire's deadline loomed, and she grew bolder, her words cutting deeper. "We've booked a tour for you at Willow Creek," she said one night, naming a senior home. "It's next week. You need to go." I looked at her, my heart steady despite the sting. "I'll think about it," I said. My voice calm. She stared, her frustration clear, but I didn't flinch. Mark was worse, his entitlement spilling over. "We're moving forward with the renovation," he said at dinner, his eyes on me. "Your room's first." I didn't respond, just ate my meal, my silence a shield. They thought they were winning, but they were blind to the truth. I started spending more time away with Margaret and the book club, with Sarah at her cafe. Their laughter, their stories filled the holes Claire had left. Margaret especially became my anchor. One night over wine at her house, I told her everything, the apartment, the business, the letter. She listened, her eyes fierce. "Amelia, you're not just taking back your life. You're showing them what strength looks like," she said. "When you're ready, they'll see." I hugged her, my heart full. These women, these friends were my family, now chosen and true. One morning, I did something bold. I wore George's old watch, a heavy silver piece I'd kept in a drawer for years. It was too big for my wrist, but its weight felt right, a reminder of his strength in me. I wore it to the office, to the park, to the garden, and with every tick, I felt him closer. I also started wearing the green dress more often, its color a declaration of my presence. People noticed Tom, Sarah, even strangers at the grocery store, their compliments small sparks that kept my flame alive. But the pain was still there, sharp and raw. One afternoon, Jack came to my room, his face hesitant. I braced myself, expecting another request for money. Instead, he mumbled, "Mom says you're leaving soon. Is that true?" My heart ached at the question, at the flicker of something like sadness in his eyes. I wanted to pull him close to tell him I'd always love him, but I didn't. "I'm figuring things out, Jack," I said softly. He nodded, then left, and I sat there, the locket in my hand, grieving the boy who used to call me Nana. I loved my grandchildren, but I couldn't keep breaking myself for them. The next day, I took another step. I told Tom to send the letter to Mark, not to his home, but to his office email where Claire wouldn't see it. It was time he knew the truth, time he faced the reality of who I was. The letter was polite but clear. I was the sole owner of the company, and all financial decisions, including his bonuses, were under my control. I didn't expect a response, didn't need one. This wasn't about confrontation, it was about clarity. Tom sent it, his expression grim but proud. "You're doing it, Amelia," he said. "You're taking the reins." That evening I went to the apartment, my first night there. I didn't sleep, just sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, the locket around my neck. The city was quiet, the stars faint above, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. This was my home now, not because of the walls or the balcony, but because I'd chosen it. I thought of George, of the note in the locket, and smiled. "I'm shining love," I whispered, and knew he'd hear me. At the house, things unraveled fast. Mark came home the next night, his face pale, his voice tight. "Amelia, we need to talk," he said, cornering me in the kitchen. Claire was there, her eyes narrowing. I knew he'd gotten the letter, knew the ground was shifting. "Not now," I said, my voice steady, and walked away, leaving them stunned. I wasn't ready to show my hand, not yet. I needed one more piece in place, one more moment to be sure. The garden was my anchor, its blooms a mirror of my growth. I planted a final rose bush, this one white, its buds tight but promising. Lily helped her hands gentle in the soil. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, my throat tight. "But I'll be close," I said. "You'll always know where to find me." She hugged me, her tears warm against my shoulder, and I knew I'd found something precious in her, a daughter of the heart. I was almost ready. The apartment was waiting, the will was signed, the letter was sent. Claire's deadline was days away, but I wasn't counting her days anymore. I was counting mine, each one a step toward the life I deserved. The rosebush bloomed, the watch ticked, the locket gleamed. I was Amelia, and I was no longer afraid. The truth was coming, and when it did, it would be on my terms with the quiet strength I'd carried all along. The air in the house was electric now, charged with the unspoken truth that everything was about to change. Mark's face that night in the kitchen, pale, his jaw tight, told me he'd read the letter, that he knew I wasn't the helpless widow he'd dismissed. Claire sensed it too, her eyes darting between us, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of an explanation. I was done playing their game. My bags were packed, hidden in the trunk of my car, and the apartment was ready, its balcony waiting for my roses. I was on the edge of freedom, but I had one last move to make, one final moment to show them who I was. The next morning, I woke early, the house still asleep. I went to the garden, my sanctuary, and sat by the white rosebush Lily and I had planted. Its buds were opening their petals soft against the dawn. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the life I'd coaxed from the earth, and knew I was ready. Today was the day, not Claire's deadline, but mine. I'd leave, but not quietly, not as the burden they'd labeled me. I'd leave as Amelia, the woman who'd built their world and could take it back with a single signature. I drove to the office, the locket around my neck, George's watch on my wrist. Tom was waiting, his face a mix of pride and anticipation. "It's time, isn't it?" he asked, handing me a folder. Inside was everything I needed: the company's ownership papers, the financial records showing Mark and Claire's misuse of funds, and a new letter, this one addressed to the entire staff. It was my announcement, my truth. I nodded, my heart steady. "Call a meeting," I said. "Everyone, including Mark." Tom grinned, his eyes gleaming. "You've got it, boss." The meeting was set for noon in the large conference room. I spent the morning preparing not just the papers, but myself. I wore the green dress, its color a banner of my strength, and pinned my hair up the way George always loved. I looked in the office bathroom mirror, seeing the lines on my face, the fire in my eyes, and smiled. This was Amelia Whitaker, not the shadow Claire had tried to make me. I was ready to step into the light. At home, I'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Simple and direct, Claire, Mark, I'm moving out today. We'll talk soon. I didn't owe them more, not after everything. I knew they'd find it when they woke. Knew Claire would be furious. Mark rattled. Let them stew. I was done tiptoeing around their feelings. My car was packed, my apartment waiting, and my garden would bloom without me. I'd given Lily the key to the shed, asked her to tend it, and she'd promised her eyes wet, but proud. The conference room filled quickly, the staff buzzing with curiosity. Mark arrived last, his face a mask of unease. He didn't look at me, just took a seat at the far end, his hands clenched. I stood at the head of the table, Tom at my side, and felt a calm settle over me. This was my moment not to shout or accuse, but to speak my truth with the dignity I'd earned. I opened the folder, my voice clear as I began. Good afternoon, everyone, I said, my eyes sweeping the room. Most of you know me as George Whitaker's widow, the woman who helped start this company. But I'm here to clarify something. I am the sole owner of Whitaker Trucking, and I always have been. A murmur ran through the room, eyes widening. Mark shifted his face, paling further. I continued, my voice steady. For years, I've worked behind the scenes, trusting others to carry out my vision. But trust can be misplaced, and I've learned that the hard way. I held up the financial records, their numbers stark. These show funds misused bonuses taken without approval, personal expenses charged to the company. This stops today. I didn't name Mark. Didn't need to. The room was silent, every eye on me. I turned to the staff, softening my tone. You've kept this company strong, and I'm here to ensure it stays that way. The new contract we've signed is just the beginning. I'm stepping back in, not to control, but to protect what George and I built. Then I looked at Mark, my gaze unwavering. Mark, your role here is under review. Effective immediately, your access to company accounts is frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came. The room was still the air thick with shock. I didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My truth was enough. I closed the folder, my hands steady. Thank you all for your work. Let's keep building. The staff erupted in applause, their faces full of respect, some with tears. Tom squeezed my shoulder, his grin wide. Mark stood his chair, scraping, and left without a word. I let him go. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about the company, about the life I was reclaiming. After the meeting, I drove to the house one last time. Claire was in the kitchen, the note crumpled in her hand, her face a storm of anger and confusion. What is this, Mom? She demanded. You can't just leave like this. I looked at her, my daughter, and felt a pang of love mixed with grief. I already have Claire. I said, my voice calm. This house, your life, it's been mine all along. The business, the deed, everything. You didn't know because you never asked. Her eyes widened, her mouth working soundlessly. I didn't wait for her response. I walked to my room, grabbed the last box, a small one with George's letters and the vase of roses, and left. Claire followed, her voice rising. You can't do this. We need you here. I turned the locket warm against my skin. You needed me when it suited you, I said softly. Now I'm choosing me. I walked out the door, closing behind me, her shouts fading into the morning. I drove to the apartment, my heart pounding but light. The balcony was as I'd imagined, the light golden, the air sweet. I set the vase on the table, the roses vibrant, and opened the locket, tracing George's face. We did it, I whispered, smiling through tears. I wasn't angry, wasn't vengeful. I was free. That evening, Lily came by, her arms full of marigolds from the garden. We sat on the balcony, laughing, planning new pots. She didn't ask about Claire or Mark, just held my hand, her presence enough. Later, I called Margaret, told her everything. "You're a damn queen, Amelia," she said, and I laughed the sound full and real. The next day, Tom called. Mark had resigned effective immediately. Claire had called the office demanding answers, but Tom handled it, keeping my wishes clear. The staff was rallying, the contract thriving. I thanked him, my heart full. I wasn't going back full-time, but I'd stay involved, my legacy secure. I stood on the balcony, the city alive below, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Claire and Mark would face their choices, but that was theirs to carry. I'd given them everything, and now I was giving myself the same. The roses bloomed, the watch ticked, the locket gleamed. I was Amelia, and I was whole. The balcony became my world in those first days, a small universe where I could breathe. I'd wake early, the city still quiet, and sit with my coffee watching the roses catch the morning light. The apartment was simple bare walls, a few boxes still unpacked, but it was mine every inch, a choice I'd made. The vase of roses sat on the table, their petals a reminder of the garden I'd left behind, and the locket hung around my neck. George's note tucked inside, his words a steady pulse. Never stop shining. I was shining now, not for Claire or Mark or anyone else, but for myself. It was a quiet glow, hard-won and fiercely mine. I didn't hear from Claire after I left, and I didn't expect to. Mark's resignation had sent ripples through the company, but Tom handled it with his usual calm, keeping me updated without burdening me. The staff sent a card, their signatures and kind words, a warmth I carried with me. I wasn't going back to the office full-time, I'd earned my rest, but I stayed involved reviewing contracts, guiding Tom, ensuring the star George and I had built kept burning. The business was my legacy, but it was no longer my life. My life was here in this apartment, in the new roots I was planting. Lily was a constant, her visits a bright thread in my days. She'd come with cuttings from the garden marigolds, lavender, even a small sprig from the white rosebush, and we'd pot them together, our hands in the soil, our laughter soft. She was thriving, her father's health, improving her dreams of teaching closer with every class she took. I'd funded her tuition through the provision in my will, but I didn't tell her not yet. It was enough to see her smile to know I'd helped her bloom. One afternoon, she brought a photo of the garden, its colors vibrant under her care. "It's still yours, Amelia," she said, her eyes warm. I hugged her, my throat tight, and knew the garden wasn't just the one I'd left, it was the love we'd grown. The kind that didn't fade. Margaret and the book club were my other anchor. We'd meet at her house or a cafe, our conversations a tapestry of stories and strength. They'd heard about my move, my stand at the office, and their pride was a fire that warmed me. "You showed them," Amelia Margaret said one night, raising her glass. "Here's to you, to us, to never letting anyone dim our light." We clinked glasses, and I felt it, the belonging, the chosen family who saw me as I was. I wore the green dress, George's watch, and laughed until my sides ached, the sound carrying me forward. The pain of Claire's betrayal lingered, a bruise that ached when I thought of her. I loved her still, my daughter, but I'd learned love didn't mean sacrifice. I'd given her everything, my money, my home, my heart, and she'd thrown it away. I didn't hate her, didn't wish her ill. I just couldn't carry her anymore. Emily and Jack were another ache, their silence a reminder of what I'd lost. But I'd provided for them in the will trusts they'd access when they were ready, free of Claire and Mark's influence. I hoped one day they'd see me not as the grandmother they'd ignored, but as the woman who'd loved them enough to let go. I started new rituals in the apartment. I'd write in the journal Lily gave me, filling its pages with memories, dreams, truths. I'd walk to the park where George and I used to go, sitting on our bench, the locket in my hand. I'd talk to him not out of sadness, but out of joy, sharing the life I was building. I joined a gardening club, meeting women my age who loved the earth, as I did their hands as weathered and wise as mine. I even took a painting class, my canvases clumsy but bold splashes of color that felt like me. One evening, as I watered the roses on the balcony, I thought about forgiveness. I didn't owe it to Claire, or Mark didn't need to absolve them to find peace. But I forgave myself for the years I'd dimmed my light, for the times I'd believed I was a burden. That forgiveness was a gift, one that let me stand taller, breathe deeper. I looked at the city lights, the stars faint above, and felt whole not because of what I'd left behind, but because of what I'd claimed. The next day, Lily came by her arms full of tulip bulbs. We planted them in pots, our hands moving in rhythm, the jazz from her father's radio filling the air. As we worked, I made a decision. I took off the locket, its silver warm from my skin, and opened it, showing her the photo of George and me, the note he'd written. "This is my heart," I said, my voice steady, "and I want you to have it." Her eyes widened, tears welling. "Amelia." "I can't," she started, but I pressed it into her hand. "You can," I said. "You've given me so much. This is my way of saying thank you." She hugged me, her sobs soft against my shoulder, and I knew I'd chosen right. The locket wasn't just an heirloom, it was a promise, a piece of my strength passed to someone who'd carry it forward. That night I sat on the balcony, the tulip pots lined up their soil, full of possibility. I thought of the rose bush, the garden, the life I'd built and left behind. I thought of Claire, Mark, Emily, Jack, and wished them well, but from a distance. My heart was here in this moment in the life I'd chosen. I opened the journal, wrote one last line. "Your worth isn't measured by who accepts you, but by how you choose to honor yourself." I closed it. My hand steady and looked at the stars. They were faint, but they were there, just like me. The roses bloomed, the tulips waited, the city hummed below. I was Amelia, 68, and alive, my light undimmed. I'd walked out, taken my business, my heart, my life. And in the quiet of my balcony, with the locket now Lily's, and the future mine, I was at peace.